It's a public document. You can go online and get it off of my webpage. But we went through all of the different issues, and the number one issue understood to be the most significant thing that we could do in this country to advance gun safety and gun violence prevention is the expansion of background checks, to make sure that everybody who buys a gun through the commercial sale of firearms undergoes a background check to make sure they're not a criminal, to make sure they're not dangerously mentally ill. And the way it works right now is in the federal law states that if you buy a gun through a licensed dealer, you have to have a background check. And in some states, they've increased that bar. For instance, in California, if you transfer a firearm to anyone, you have to, that anyone has to get a background check. However, in it's either 34 or 37 other states, their law is the federal floor. So in those states, you can go into a gun store, you can attempt to buy a gun, they do a background check and find out that you're a prohibited individual, not allowed to own firearms. You can turn around and walk out, go to a gun show, go to online to an online entity that sells guns, or go to respond to a newspaper ad, and you can buy the same gun without going through a background check. And everybody focuses on the big shooting events that take place, the mass shootings, which are tragic and terrible. And we just had one a couple of weeks ago in Florida that was beyond imaginable. Before that, one in Texas. Before that, one up in Tehama County. Before that, one in Las Vegas. And a lot of folks focus on those as the problem, and no doubt about it, they're terrible, they're tragic, they shouldn't happen. But please don't lose sight of the fact that every day 30 people are killed by someone using a gun. And that number, the daily murders that take place with a firearm, far outshadows the number of people killed in mass shootings. And that's why focusing on background checks is the number one policy change that can save the most lives. And that's what we've been working on. I have legislation, I wrote it 5.5 years ago after Sandy Hook, that would expand those background checks to all commercial sales. It's a bipartisan piece of legislation, and sadly, it has not had one single hearing in the House of Representatives, and it's not had one single vote in the House of Representatives. And we know that works. We know it saves lives. We know that every day through the federal background check system, 170 felons are stopped from buying guns. 50 domestic abusers every day are stopped from buying guns. And some 20 fugitives a day are stopped from buying guns. And we know if we expand it, it'll even be more helpful. And it's, I think, shameful that the leadership in the House of Representatives won't bring this bill to a vote on the floor or bring it before a committee for a hearing. So we're working really hard to keep the pressure on, making it happen. I think that things are changing a little bit given the tragedy in Florida, and I'm sure everyone has heard the incredible students from Florida who've been so dedicated, so outspoken, so articulate on this issue, and I think that's going to change what's taken place on the ground to date. I see the younger generation, the new voters coming about are really going to push this and really make it happen. And I'll tell all of you what I tell my friends who are gun owners and my critics who are critical of my position on guns. It's time for responsible gun owners to stand up and get involved and help us move forward reasonable, responsible, appropriate legislation to deal with this issue of gun violence prevention. And if you don't, because you don't think any rules should be increased and you're offended by that, if you don't, just be on alert that you're going to be really offended, because this new generation of voters don't feel the same way that you do. want some changes. They want to make sure that they're safe in school, that they're safe in their community, and they're going to make it happen. And it's not going to be any different than what young voters have been able to accomplish in the past. And look no further than what the young generation of voters did in regard to the civil rights movement. Look no further than what the young generation of voters did in regard to the Vietnam War. And there's a wave out there of young voters, and it's, I think, important that responsible gun owners stand up and speak out and make sure we can get some good laws on the books that will keep our community safer. And that's all I have to say. I want to hear from you. We set this up so we could, folks could come out and talk, and I could hear their ideas, and I want to hear what you have to say, and especially young people. I know there's some kids here, and young kids and their parents I've heard nonstop since Florida.
I am a student at Benicia High School, and I was at the vigil, and I helped organize the vigil along with many of the students here on Saturday, and you sent a letter down there and had, I believe, Rebecca over there speak, and I just wanted to thank you for that, and I thought it was very kind of you, and you also let us know about this town hall, so thank you for that. Now, the piece of legislation you were referring to, is that the Public Safety and Second Amendment Rights Protection Act?
It is, yes.
Okay. So if you don't mind, I'd like to read some of it and just ask some clarifying questions. Is that okay? Okay. Sorry about that. Okay, let's see. So it says that it would prohibit the transfer of guns at gun shows over the internet or through classified listings except in the following circumstances.
Except in what?
Except in a few circumstances, but that is correct, that it would prohibit the transfer.
That's correct.
Okay. I'd like to read one of the circumstances, if that's all right. If the transfer is made between spouses, between parents or spouses and their children or spouses of their children, between grandparents of their spouses and grandchildren or their spouses, between aunts and uncles or their spouses and their nieces or nephews or their spouses, or between first cousins, and the transferor doesn't have reasonable cause to believe the transferee is prohibited from possessing a firearm under federal, state, or local law. Is that correct?
Correct.
So in California, currently, you're not allowed to buy an AR-15, but if you do have an AR-15, it has to be registered. Is that correct?
Correct.
So under this law, would that mean that an adult who has a registered AR-15 could give that AR-15 to a child if they deem that child responsible enough to own a firearm?
What it means is that family members are exempt. As I stated, the legislation that I have would cover commercial sales. So if your dad wants to give you a gun or your mother wants to give you a gun, it wouldn't require a background check. And you're correct about California. California has laws that are stricter than a lot of states. And what the California law says that any transfer of a firearm, the person receiving the firearm has to have a background check. So if I give a gun to my son, I have a son who's a deputy sheriff. If I give him a gun, we would have to go to a licensed dealer, to someone who is legally authorized to do the background checks. That dealer would take the gun, it would run the background check, and if my son passed the background check, he could take possession of the gun after 10 days. So California is much stricter. The problem is all states aren't. So you can go to California, try and buy a gun. Turns out you're prohibited, can't get the gun, and you can go across the border to Nevada, get the same gun, and bring it back. That's the purpose of that.
Oh, I'm sorry. Could I just ask a clarifying question?
Pardon me?
Could I ask a clarification on that?
Yeah.
Okay. So the laws here are more strict, right? So
Correct.
if somebody has to pass a background check, but if you're trying to implement this law nationally or federally, then the other states who don't have those provisions that say your family member has to be able to pass a background check, that could mean that the adult, if I'm correct, that could mean that the adult would be able to judge their child, and obviously a parent might be a little biased toward their child, and could give their child an assault rifle and not have to go through any background checks. And that just worries me as a student a little bit, because that means that, if the parent judged incorrectly, then a potential shooter could have a gun without having to go through any legal process of buying it. So that's why I'm worried. And I was wondering what you could change in that law to make it so that states that don't have the provisions that we do would make sure that these guns don't get into the hands of those kinds of people.
Excellent question. And the answer is, remember what I said when I started? For 5.5 years, we've been trying to get a hearing on a bill that expands background checks and haven't been able to do that. So it's really a bridge too far to expect that this Congress, the leadership of this Congress, is going to take something that's more restrictive than the bill that I have and pass that into law. So that's what that's about. And there's a real insistence on a lot of members of Congress that family provision or hunting buddy provision stay as is in those states. And if my bill were to pass and to be signed into law, it would apply to every state, but it would apply according to those other state laws. Okay.
Again, Mr. Thompson, thank you again. Would you agree that we live in a very, very censored news environment?
In a very what?
Censored news environment because of the many, many conflicts of interest.
I don't follow.
Well, for example, we're not exposed to the trauma, the sorrow of gun violence on the news. I know that your admirable service includes the Vietnam War. You fought in the Vietnam War. Thank you for that. But a big turning point when the for those of us who are old enough, do you recall the scene on 60 Minutes where the South Vietnamese general shot that North Vietnamese prisoner of war in the head, and there is that candy cane gush of blood? That was a big turning point in the American sentiment against the Vietnam War. Another example, I'm able to watch both the British version of the BBC News as well as the Americanized version of the BBC News. And our Americanized version is not near as harsh. You know, we are not sobered into, in other words, we haven't had our watershed moment with gun violence here because nobody's seen the watershed moment yet.
Well, I think
unlike Vietnam, where there's that candy cane gush.
I think in regard to gun violence, I think the American people have seen a lot. They saw the aftermath of Sandy Hook. They saw the aftermath of Virginia, the aftermath of Miami. They saw as close as you can get to an actual murder on TV when the news reporter in Virginia was shot nearly on camera. So I think there's a lot of news coverage of this epidemic.
Words, but not images, in my opinion. I don't know if everybody else has this opinion that I have. Sure, there's Hollywood, that whole enculturation thing. But another thing, I don't need the microphone. Sorry?
Talk, go ahead.
Mr. Thompson, are you by any remote chance related to the designer of the Thompson submachine gun?
No. No. But thanks. Yes. Yeah. Come on, a lot of people want to talk, so ask a question.
Okay, yes. You know, the Thompson, made illegal since 1933, is inferior to today's assault rifles in terms of bullet speed, bullet accuracy, bullet range, ballistic damage upon impact, and it is still illegal. The assault rifles like the AR-15 types are much more deadly in terms of bullet range, accuracy, ballistic range, right, you know, et cetera, et cetera. But incongruously, today's AR-15 type weapon is legal for most of us to buy. Yet the Thompson is virtually illegal for all the rest of us to buy. Why is there that incongruity? You know.
Well,
thank you.
There's probably not a clear understanding of the firearm nomenclature. And you know, you see when folks talk about these mass shootings, they'll say machine guns. It's often spoken, and they're not. They're single-shot, semi-automatic weapons that fire with each trigger pull, and that's why in the Las Vegas tragedy, they had an accessory on the firearm called a bump stock that allowed that semi-automatic rifle to function as though it were fully automatic. Fully automatic rifles are not illegal. You can own one in the United States of America, but there's a much higher threshold in order to be qualified, to be vetted, and a much higher fee you have to pay in order to get that. And that's why the automatic weapons fall under the Firearms Act of I don't remember what year, but made illegal fully automatic sawed-off shotguns and those types of things. That's the difference.
Hi, Congressman. Thank you for holding this. In another one of your provisions, it says that if the transfer is between two unlicensed individuals residing in the same state, and the Attorney General certifies that the state has requirements that are generally equivalent to this bill's requirements, and that the transfer was in compliance with state laws. Can you clarify what you mean by generally equivalent? Because, like, as we know, state laws vary when it comes to gun control.
In the 4240, the bill, I believe that's boilerplate language that deals with those transfers. There's nothing nefarious in that. It's just the language, the legal language needed in order to clarify that provision. There's nothing. Okay?
It's the second most important thing to accomplish. And do you think the ban of assault rifles is possible and effective?
Well, there's a number of things that I think are important to do, and I've got some legislation that does a lot of those, and if I don't, members of my task force have pieces of legislation that address it. One of the most important things that we can do is to get rid of a roadblock that was done statutorily that makes it difficult, if not impossible, for the Center on Disease Control to do research on gun violence. It's really important that we do that. It was passed in the 90s. The author of that bill, now deceased, woke up and wrote a good letter to me explaining that what has been done with that law is not what he intended, and stated that he too believes it should be expunged. So we're working on that. There's a number of things that work well. California has a provision in law, whereas if someone calls the cops, if I call you and say, I think the mayor, who I know has guns, is having some problems and may be a danger to himself or others, you can go to the mayor, talk to him, and if the law enforcement sees that there's a problem or believes there's a problem, can get a warrant and can separate the gun owner from the guns until the appropriate evaluation has been made. That came about after the tragic shooting in Isla Vista, where I believe it was a parent contacted law enforcement and said, we're worried about our kid, he's got guns, we think he's a danger to himself or others. The cops responded, they interviewed the kid, they said, we don't see any signs, and they had no tools available to them to remove the guns from the house. So California has passed that. A couple of other states have, and we should do that at a federal level. We should incentivize it at a federal level. There's certain things that can only be done at the local level, but we can provide incentives for state and locals to do that. There needs to be some way to make sure that prohibited people understand that they can't have guns. And there's different programs that have worked and work well. Ohio has a great program where if someone's convicted of a crime that makes them prohibited, at the time of sentencing, they walk it through with the individual. They say, now you may have guns, you may have legally been able to purchase them before, but with this conviction, you can't have them anymore. So if you have guns, we'll work with you, we'll help transfer them to someone out of the house, we'll help you sell them, destroy them, whatever. But if you don't, and we catch you with a gun, you're going to go to jail for a long time. California has a law that does it differently, and somebody mentioned the assault weapon registration and handgun registration. There's a list of gun owners that have certain types of guns in California. So they can take that list and juxtapose it with the prohibited list, and they can tell you which prohibited individuals own firearms. And so they have a program that goes out and makes contact with a person, explains the drill, helps them get rid of those guns. Things like that work real well. We need to do more in regard to mental health. There's some interesting proposals in that regard. But just know that someone who's mentally ill is more apt to be a victim rather than a perpetrator.
Hi, Senator. My name's Valentina. I'm a student at Benicia High School. And my question for you is, in your bill to strengthen background checks and requiring them for all commercial gun sales, it stated that the bill would prevent the creation of a national gun registry. Why? And what are the negatives of a gun registry?
Well, the problem with a national gun registry is that a lot of folks are very, very worried that if there was a registry, it would give the government a roadmap to disarm the American people. And that's why it's a major hurdle to try and deal with that. You would never get the support to do it. Folks think that if the government has a list, the next thing they're going to do is come to your house and take your guns. So it's a political issue.
As appreciative as I am of attempting to institute universal background checks, something that I think is very long overdue, the current background check system has two fatal flaws, one of which concerns mental health, because the only thing that mental health, the only thing that the current NICS program checks for is if a judge has deemed you mentally incompetent or ordered you on a psychiatric hold. The other part of that is in terms of domestic violence convictions, it only applies a disqualifier if you have been married to or lived with the victim. Is anything being done to address that in the current background check system?
The short answer is yes, and excellent points. There are other issues with the NICS system that need to be addressed. But there's a number of bills that have been introduced to expand the domestic abuser provision. There's work being done on the mental capacity side of the issue. And probably the biggest issue with NICS is there are a lot of records that just aren't in the system. And it's a costly endeavor to get all the records in, and sometimes it's just been the entity that's responsible for forwarding that information just hasn't done the job. And we saw that with the Texas church shooting, where the Air Force, the guy got out of the Air Force, should have been reported to NICS that he was in the prohibited class. The Air Force did not forward those records. He was able to get a gun, and he created all that tragedy in Texas. So you've got to have good information in if you're going to get good information out. That's been a problem for a long time. A couple of years ago, I led a floor fight in the House to pass an amendment to augment the budget for the NICS system. We added, I think it was about $21 or $22 million to NICS, because we found out that there were a number of states that had there was one state that had 4 entries in the NICS system for the entire state. And there's not a neighborhood that doesn't have more entries than that. And every time it comes down to money, they don't have the money to do it. So we expanded the money. And everybody should know that there is a budget proposal right now by this president to reduce by about the same amount that I augmented the NICS budget, which is a huge problem. And then there's little glitches. You remember the Charleston shooting where the guy got the gun and went into the church in Charleston and killed eight worshipers? He bought his gun at a licensed dealer. And the law says that if they're not able to do the background check and conclusively find that you're prohibited within 72 hours, you get the gun. Now, California, as I mentioned, has a much stiffer requirement. In California, there's a 10-day waiting period. So they have 10 days where they can, figure it out. South Carolina didn't. They were going by the federal law. So the kid buys the gun, gets the background check, and it came back inconclusive. And it was some sort of jurisdictional overlap with the city and the county, and it got hung up that way. And at the end of 72 hours, he came back, and they hadn't yet determined conclusively if he was prohibited or not. So by federal law, they were forced to give him the gun. He went out and killed 8 people the next day. So there's a number of things that need to be improved, and we should be working on all those.
So my question is about the proposed legislation. It doesn't actually address what you're proposing in terms of background checks for current gun owners, not those that are going to purchase, but current gun owners. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about that. But also, I'm really concerned about the global impacts of some of our lax gun laws, especially those along border states. And I'm just giving an example. For example, Mexico has had just as many killings via guns as the United States has. A lot of people contribute it to the war on drugs. However, 90% of the guns that are confiscated from Mexicans are from the United States. And so there's a serious global impact to all of the trafficking and smuggling of guns that's occurring in this country. And I'd like you to talk about how this bill can begin to build that bridge towards addressing that as well.
Well, my bill doesn't address that, as you point out. I would argue that in regard to building that bridge, as you define it, I think this is a positive step in being able to address all issues germane to gun violence. As I said, we haven't been able to do anything at all. So by doing this would be, I think, a positive step in the right direction. And you're right, there's a number of places that the federal entity that regulates gun sales has really worked hard to try and target those irresponsible business people. There's places all over the United States where they are able to trace crime guns back to those places. It's not just along the border states. There's a lot of states in the east. Somebody I know here is from Indiana, and Indiana is one of those problem areas. And when they talk about gun crime in Chicago, oftentimes the critics say, well, Chicago has real tough laws, but they have real high gun crime rates. A large and disproportionate number of those guns come from other states. Neighboring Indiana is one of them. Matter of fact, it's so rampant that they named the highway that runs through Indiana and Chicago the Iron Triangle or the Iron Highway or something. That's how much of a problem that is. So you're right. We need to get a better handle on it. I think my bill is the logical first step.
The first question I had was relative to the bill that you currently have, and it doesn't talk anything about making sure that current gun owners are also background checked.
It would be number one. It would never pass the legislature, the Congress, and number two, it would be extremely difficult to go back and check on everybody who owns guns. There's 350 million guns in civilian hands in the United States of America, and I don't know how you would be able to go back and do all that stuff.
Congressman Thompson, my name is Sherry Zeta. We met briefly. I'm a local resident in Benicia. I started a campaign with another woman to do the Benicia March for Our Lives event on March 24th. We want to invite you to that rally so that you can speak on behalf of all of us. We would love to have you there. We'd also love to invite everybody else to the rally and the march on March 24th at 10 a.m. in the morning. That will be on First Street, and there'll be more information online. We would really like to have you be a part of that. I'm working with the students at Benicia High School and other local area people that are I'm really nervous. Oh my goodness.
Don't be nervous.
Oh my goodness. This is not my thing. I don't get up in front of people and talk, but this has affected me to the core, and I just firmly believe that these kids are going to make a change, and I want to help them get their voice out there, and that's what I'm here for, so thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for organizing the march. Thank you for doing what you're doing. And if I can be there, I will. There's nothing wrong with being nervous when you stand up in front of people. I think I told you I met with some of the young people from Parkland, and there was one young high school senior who was just lights out fantastic. And her dad was in Washington with her, and I asked her dad, I said, you've got to be proud of your daughter. And he said, boy, I'm really proud of her. And I said, has she always been like this? He said, no. He said, I've got two kids. The son is outgoing. He'll talk to anybody, anytime about anything. She's real quiet and withdrawn. She says, but this was her class, and it changed her, and you're not going to stop her. So.
Good afternoon, Congressman Thompson. I want to thank you again for holding this. In light of what you said, I think, the number one fear of humans is public speaking. And so that means if people are at a funeral, most people would prefer to be in the casket rather than giving the eulogy. But there was a couple things, just 2 or 3 that I wanted to remark upon. Because, when you were a boy, and when many, back in the 40s and 50s and 60s.
Come on, not in the 40s.
I'm sorry.
Come on.
Sorry, I said, like, when you were a boy.
I dye my hair like this, so it gives me more stature.
The environment that we had was much different from what we have today, undoubtedly. The rates of mass shootings have catastrophically skyrocketed since 1960. So obviously we've had guns forever. Johnny wasn't taking the shotgun off the wall and heading to school with it back then. So we have to ask ourselves what has changed in our society. Now, I love the fact that children are, what they've done with civil rights and a lot of others. That's fantastic. The fact of the matter is the prefrontal cortex, which is right behind our foreheads, isn't fully developed until we're 25 years old. That's when our brains are finally fully formed, which means a lot of us, unless you're in the military, we think you shouldn't be voting until you're 25, just because that's when the brain can fully determine right and wrong. But I wanted to move on to a very controversial point, which I just want to set a little bit of background here. 1948 was the year that the Kinsey Report first was released. Before then, our nation, in 1940, I'm going to bring up a topic, and I looked around. I didn't really see any children, so I don't really want to offend anybody, but this is a very important topic. So, sorry. I'm going to try and deal with this delicately, but this is a very important topic, so I need to say this. But, and I'm going to deal with the men. I'm not really going to talk to the women. I'm going to address the men on this. But I want to ask a question to illustrate what I'm about to say. I want to say also in 1940, to set the stage for this, about 2 to 5% of the men in America had viewed or had looked at pornography. Okay, that's just a basic fact. So I want to ask right now, I want to ask every man in this audience, and I'm not standing myself, but I want the men in this audience who have never viewed pornography to stand up.
We're not going to get into pornography. I want to hear folks' interests and concerns on guns. And if you have a question or you have something on guns, say it. But you're not going to take us down that rabbit hole.
Okay. I just want to ask for a fact. If people don't want to answer, that's fine.
No, you're not going to ask. Just tell us what it is that you want to express regarding gun violence.
Anyhow, since Columbine in 1999, there has been 3 factors that have been present in every single mass shooting. And if anyone knows differently than the ones I'm going to list, definitely bring it to my attention. I'd be happy to learn something new. Those 3 factors are the aforementioned factor, the second one is Islam, and the third one is psychotropic drugs.
Okay. Thank you. I've heard this before. I've heard it from the absolute start. And I have actually consulted with mental health experts on the latter. And I don't really think it has anything to do with my legislation or anything to do with the issue that we're dealing with today. We can have a conversation later regarding mental health issue, regarding medications, but let's stick it with the gun thing for the rest of the day. Thanks.
In 5 years, and most of what we see at the White House is just a bunch of arguing and pointing fingers. How would you empower the students, the teachers, the parents to make a difference, especially with regards to, there were a lot of warning signs for the student who came back to the school. So what would you say to everyone here right now, how they can make a difference?
Okay, thank you. I would say, number one, if you see something, say something. And it's incredibly important. And there's also there's also places where they're dealing with this very effectively. Sonoma County, for instance, has a program within their county mental health where they train up schools to identify problems amongst their peers. And if they notice something, they work peer-to-peer, and they can contact the mental health department, and the mental health department has a mobile unit that will come out to the school. So there's a bunch of different ways that you can address that issue. But if you see something, say something. That's extremely important.
Hello, Mr. Thompson. Thank you. My name's John. I'm a retired California school teacher. So my question is, what's going on in the House, at least, with regard to this idea of teachers having guns? I mean, I've never heard anything so crazy. I didn't teach in Vallejo, but it wasn't far from here. And let me tell you, I would not have trusted anybody on my faculty with a gun.
Well, thank you. That's an issue. And folks have been pushing this issue of arming teachers probably since the Sandy Hook incident. I don't think it's a good idea. It's something that some states allow, some school districts allow. I've got some very, I think, serious concerns with it. First of all, school teachers are in the school to teach. I don't think there's a school teacher in any place in our district or probably in the country that's paid what they're worth. So to ask them to do more and get paid the same amount, I think it'd be ridiculous. I think school teachers need to spend their time preparing lesson plans and new methodology for teaching and stuff, not going to the gun range and becoming proficient. How much time do your officers spend making sure they're proficient with a firearm? Minimum of 16 hours a year. And they're trained professionals, so they're just boning up on what they do and do every day. So there's a real distinct difference. And I don't know how you can take somebody who has no gun experience, knowledge, or proficiency, give them a gun and say, protect the kids. Secondly, if there's a shooting in a school and somebody's got an assault weapon or a long gun of some sort, you're at a real disadvantage if you have a handgun and you go up against the long gun. That's a real tough one. Plus, add into it the fact that you're going to have students running all around. I just don't see how that situation ends up in a positive position. You have some schools where teachers have actually been overpowered by students. If you had a situation like that, a couple kids jump a teacher and take their gun away, I think that would be a huge issue. I don't think it's a good idea.
My name is Monica Brown, and I'm a retired teacher of 39 years. So this is something I believe. Yes, yeah, because you never have enough money for education. Yeah. I believe, though, that what you're working on is like Atlas, and so I believe what you could do that would be very helpful in all the classrooms in the United States is give money so that every classroom has a working phone, landline, because you never know what happens with cell. 2, a door that locks from the inside so that you don't have to go outside like that poor geography teacher. And number 3, that we don't have the rectangular window where you noticed what happened in Florida, there were shots. So those would at least be some way as a classroom teacher that I could feel comfortable and that I know that I would be protecting my kids. That I think you could get unanimous support in the House, in the Senate, and get passed by the person at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue.
Thank you, and those are excellent points. Those are excellent points, and I know there's a lot of work underway, and I don't know how the money's flowing, but some has gone out to harden up schools, and those are things that should be done. I saw someone sent me a post the other day that said, I'm a teacher and I want to be armed. I want to be armed with an adequate number of school counselors. I want to be armed with an adequate number of school nurses. And you just go right down the line. But so I agree with you. Those things should be done. And I just want to mention one other thing as far as arming teachers. After the Las Vegas shooting, and as you can probably imagine, as the chair of the Gun Violence Prevention Task Force, I've met with just about everybody who's been involved in one of these tragic shootings. And Sandy Hook, Florida, San Bernardino. And after the Nevada shooting, I had a group come who were survivors. A couple of them had been shot, a couple of them were there and were helping people avoid getting shot. And we met with them, and then a couple weeks later we got a call from one of the bands that was one of the country western bands that were playing up there, and the head of the band, the guitarist or the singer, whomever it was, told us, he said, he said, I'm a gun guy, I support the Second Amendment. He says, as a matter of fact, a week before the shooting, I purchased for my dad an AR-15. He said, I was in the bus when the shooting broke out. He said, I had a gun, I got up, he said, I got my gun, and I headed off the bus. And one of the band security guys said, oh, where do you think you're going? He said, well, they're shooting out there. He said, I'm going to go out and help. And what we found out later is that he was 500 yards away, the guy was shooting, and with a handgun, you're virtually worthless as far as helping. But the security guard told him, he says, okay, you're going to go out there, and the crowd's running, everybody's running around trying to avoid getting shot. There's cops on the ground, there's security on the ground. How many steps do you think you'll get from the bus before one of the cops sees you with a gun and shoots you? And that's another thing that factors in if there's a shooting incident in a school and a teacher runs out with a handgun. Didn't you already talk?
I did, but I got back in line. So I did get back in line. No one else was there. Okay, thank you. And this question may be met without fanfare, and I apologize to those if it is. But I have to ask this because right now I'm standing on a precipice. On one end, I am wanting to support you and support this legislation. On the other, I'm like, this isn't enough. This is not enough. And given the fact that, given the fact that I get what you're saying, that this is just the beginning. We haven't been successful at bringing bipartisan support to this issue, but I can't help lose sight of the fact about you, for example, as a leader, and how you were elected in 1998. It's known fact that you took monies from the NRA, you took monies from other gun rights activists up until 2013. What I want to know from you, so that I know which way I'm going to fall, is where do you stand with banning assault-type rifles, and where do you stand with establishing some type of federal registry? I don't care about where that could be a stumbling block to get you. I want to know where you are.
That's fine. My position on assault weapons is the same today that it's been since the moment I knew what an assault weapon was. I don't think assault weapons have any place in a civilian society. I'm a gun owner. I support the Second Amendment. And I don't think that civilians need assault weapons. The military should have them, cops should have them, civilians don't need them. If I was the genie in the bottle and could wave my wand, there wouldn't be any. Okay, here's the reality. There's 15 million assault weapon platform long guns in civilian hands right now. How you get that toothpaste back in the tube, I have no idea, and neither do you or anybody else. Okay. As far as NRA contributions, you're part right. I have taken contributions from the NRA. I took $2,000 from the NRA. It's been over a decade ago, and I've spent that much. How much did I give you guys for the gun buyback program? Pardon me?
At least a couple thousand.
Yeah, so twice I donated at least that much to a gun buyback program. I have an F grade with the NRA. Not only do I not accept NRA money, if I asked, believe me, they would not give it to me. I think it would be foolish to try and set up a federal registry. It would further divide the issue, and it would make it impossible to do any gun violence prevention legislation.
Hi, I'd like to thank you first, Mr. Thompson, for all the years that you've been trying to get something passed. And I know you must feel frustrated, and I just hope you hang in there and don't give up. And then I would like to address what the last gentleman was bringing up in his first question, which is right now is our effect on Mexico. So something like 50,000 people have died in Mexico from these gun cartel fights. And so they are fighting over the right to sell drugs to us Americans, and they are killing each other with guns that come from America. And I've heard that on some parts of the border, there's as many as 3 gun stores every mile on our side. And I think that we should ban gun sales like 100 miles from the border. What do you think of that?
Well, I don't think it's possible to do. I don't know how you take away someone's right to own a business. I think what needs to happen is there needs to be the resources that are needed to stop people who are involved in irresponsible and illegal gun sales. And I think that's the way you deal with it. I don't know that you can, I don't think the federal government can come in and do that. A local government can. A city council can pass an ordinance. As a matter of fact, I think there's one in our district who right now is looking at an ordinance that would disallow gun stores from selling assault weapon platform type of rifles. I don't know if what the constitutional impact of that would be, but they're trying. So local folks have done it. You know that local jurisdictions have stopped gun shows. There was a big gun show in San Francisco for years, and San Francisco Board of Supervisors stopped that from happening. So there are some things that can be done at that level, but I don't think Congress can do that.
Hi, I'm a elementary school teacher, and I'm a father of 3 sons, 2 in high school and 1 in college. I'm also not very good at public speaking, so I want to thank this woman for having the courage to come up because that inspired me. I wanted to talk because ever since Sandy Hook, that really affected me a lot because I teach in a classroom that's right by an entrance, and I know if there's an armed intruder, basically my last moments will be being a bodyguard to my students. This last tragedy brought home about when I dropped my boys off at school, that might be the last day that I see them. So I was up in the stands and I was talking to my wife about an idea, and I know the high school students are leading us in this current fight, and I want to applaud all high school students around, especially the ones that are organizing the March for Save Our Lives. But I also know high school students like grand gestures. If you've ever seen homecoming proposals or prom proposals, they kind of go big or they go home. So I had an idea about, is there anybody that has proposed writing an amendment to the Constitution to update the Second Amendment to fit current guns, not the guns that were in the 1700s? And I say that, and I know all the arguments are there's millions of guns out there, you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube, it's not feasible and all this other stuff, but I think back to another amendment that was passed, which is the 13th Amendment, and there was a lot of arguments against that there's millions of slaves out there, you can't do this, how are you going to educate them, all the arguments that were out there against doing it, that it was too hard, that it was not possible. And President Lincoln pushed forward that and passed that through because it was the right thing to do. So I know politics is a land of what's possible, but sometimes, every once in a while, it's also the land of what's right, doing what's right. So my question is there anybody that's out there that's writing an amendment to the Constitution to update the Second Amendment? And if not, would you have the courage to help write that and show what it would look like? Right now, it seems like the NRA and the gun lobby is structuring the debate. And all we're trying to do is having these little Band-Aids to try to put over open heart surgery. And it's not enough, like the gentleman said before. We need something grand, something bigger. And is there something out there that we can see what it would look like? What would another amendment to the Constitution look like? Right now, I don't know if there's anything out there.
Let me say this. Please don't minimize the background check expansion as going small, because the background check expansion is going pretty big. It'll save lives. There are 30 people a day are killed by someone using a gun. Many of those folks would not be able to get a gun if there was an expansion of the background check. So it's a huge step. It's never been able to be accomplished yet. That was taken out of, or it wasn't considered when the original background check bill went into place. And so to come this far is actually quite a lot. The original background check took 7 years and 6 votes, and ours has been, my proposal has been out there for 5.5 years, no votes. So we're really running ahead of the clock. And in regard to amendments to the Constitution, there's been many, and there's probably many right now, efforts to amend the Second Amendment.
Is there anything that's been written out, that's been published, that's been put out there?
I'm sure there is. I can do the run on it and get it to you if you give my staff your address.
I didn't want to minimize your bill. I'm sure it would save lives. But what I'm saying is that it doesn't do anything to solve the underlying gun culture, the gun attitude in this country that seems like other developed countries have already resolved, not just from millions of mass shootings, but just one mass shooting. And the country gathered together to change their culture about guns. And
I mean, there's a lot of things. At my town hall meeting this morning, somebody blamed you guys, blamed the teachers, because you don't teach the golden rule anymore. So I mean, there's a gazillion ideas of what to do to change things. I don't think there's one answer. I think it's a lot, and some of it may not be considered going big, but it's very, very important to do. Some of the legislation that I talked about, just the removing the ban on doing research at CDC would be huge, to be able to do the research to find out why people do what they do.
Question for you. I just bought a car, and in order to get that car, I had to have financial responsibility. I had to get a license for it. I had to have had a driver's license, that I had to take driver's education to drive it, and all that type of thing. And it seems to me that I can just go to Nevada, buy a gun, and just use it. And I mean, people make the argument that, oh, well, a pistol and an AR-15s aren't really what you think it is and stuff. But, I mean, there still has to be a certain amount of logical use to using the thing. And I just kind of wondered about that, because it's like, if my grandpa gives me a gun and I, decide to go out and shoot in the backyard and wipe out half of the neighborhood, I mean, what's the responsibility of that?
Well, I don't disagree. I think that gun owners need to be responsible individuals. We need to do everything we can to teach that responsible handling of firearms and pass laws that would regulate and better ensure that people handle firearms responsibly. The difference between a car and a gun, and any critic of mine will tell you this, a gun is in the Constitution, a car is not, and that's the rub.
Okay, we're almost out of time, so we're just going to do one more question.
Let's keep going. We're
going?
Who's here from the school? Yeah. Are you guys going to throw me out if I go a little longer? Go ahead.
Well, I'm going to dovetail on the last person who spoke up here, because since all of this recent activity, I've been reading about the origin of the Second Amendment, and I always thought, the Second Amendment is sacrosanct, and no, we don't want to take your guns, but if you start to really read about the Second Amendment, which probably you've done, it wasn't for the U.S. citizens to fight the British, it was for the southern states to keep their slaves in line. The whole history of it, and the reason it was a state right rather than a national, and it wasn't written up as a federal law, was because they wanted to get the states on board in the South, and it was to help slave owners, it was for white slave owners, it was for duels. Concealed carry was considered not manly behavior, so people didn't have concealed carry. If you start reading, this was in the Atlantic, it's a page and a half. So like the person who spoke before me, I know you can't, open, Pandora's box is open, you can't close it. But these guns that are out there will eventually rust and die. The point is, if you could stop new guns, if you could change this amendment, all of this was done to preserve a slavery culture that we no longer buy into. And I don't think most people know that. I mean, I'm a teacher, I'm a parent. I didn't know any of this, and now you can read it all over the place. And a lot of historians probably do know it. So why are we upholding this? And the first time the Second Amendment was used was in 1846. It wasn't used again for 200 years. And suddenly, like, our Second Amendment is sacrosanct. And as one Australian comic said on a Facebook riff I saw, it's called an amendment. You can change it. So I'm with the last guy. I mean, I appreciate all you're doing. I'm very, very grateful. I don't know how you tackle something this large, but it seems to me other cultures have done just what he said. They've changed their gun culture. Of course, automatic rifles or whatever they're called don't have a place in civilian life, but really, do all these handguns, I mean, how many deer are actually being shot? You know, like, let's read history. We're teachers. You know what I mean? We're teachers. Let's read how this happened and let's go back to it and shine light on it.
Okay, let me just take a second on the Second Amendment. You know, the issue of gun violence prevention, gun safety, sensible, reasonable laws has always been tough because the nation's been divided. You have people on one side who think that because of the Second Amendment, you can have any gun, anytime, any place. There should be no restrictions. Then you have people on the other side who say there shouldn't be any guns. So it's been a pretty good divide. What the Supreme Court did in the ruling on the Second Amendment in Heller versus the District of Columbia in 2005, I think it was, 2003, they said that individuals have a right to own a firearm. And the government has a right to regulate that ownership of firearm. So it really got rid of the divided group, and it should force people into the middle to recognize, okay, you can own a gun. Now, how do we regulate that to make sure it's owned responsibly and used safely? And that's what we should be looking at. I think that I'll probably have a bill that's passed and signed into law expanding background checks that we know will save lives quicker than we're going to amend the Constitution of the United States of America. So you should hold those values that you have, but just know we need to get some things accomplished, and we know they work. I told you the numbers on that, and there's probably no better example than the state of Connecticut and the state of Missouri. That right after Newtown, they both passed laws regarding background checks. The state of Connecticut enhanced theirs. They beefed them up. If you buy a gun in Connecticut, you got to have a background check, very similar to the California laws. Their gun crimes went down by 40%. The state of Missouri repealed its background check provisions, and their crimes with guns went up 25%. So we know it works. We need to focus in on this. We need to get that passed.
Hi. Thank you for being here. My name is Rita Edmonds Norris, and I'm also the mother of a son who was murdered by two strangers in gun violence 24 and a half years ago. So I feel like I've been working on this issue for a very long time. And the man that was before me had a similar question to what I've been pondering for 20 years. Why is it we can get a driver's license and we have to register our car and insure it? Why do gun owners not have to insure their guns? There needs to be something that makes them stop and think how many guns they have. In my opinion, they should have to register their guns. They should have to have a license, which they have to renew every 2-3 years, whatever, and they should have to insure their weapons.
Okay. First, I'm very sorry for your loss. So I'm very sorry for your loss, and The issue of the register, I think I've already covered. It's a non-starter. No matter how much you or I think we should do it, it's not going to get any traction. It's not going to go any place. There's been no interest. I don't think any states have been able to do the insurance provision that you talked about. If they do, I don't know about it. And to do it at the federal level, it wouldn't have the support to be heard, to be passed. And as I said, we're trying to prioritize things as to what would do the most good. And rather than fighting on multiple fronts to try and do something, we're trying to coalesce behind one measure, two measures, three measures that could actually do the most good and would have a likelihood of passing. Now there's de facto liability in anything. So if you shoot me with your gun, I can sue you. And that's happened before. Most often, however, whomever does the shooting doesn't have anything to go after. And many times the shooter is not around afterwards to go after him. So you can use the law to try and get some sort of financial restitution. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
Hi, thank you for coming. My question is that you mentioned several provisions that some people were asking about, such as this lady's over here, that they would be difficult to pass, but do you think that you will face less difficulty passing some stricter provisions? Like, I know you're taking it one step at a time, but if the House seats flip, so there's Democratic majority during these midterms, do you think that you will push for stricter gun control, still doing the one step at a time approach?
Yeah. Excellent question. And don't for a minute think that there aren't other legislative proposals out there that go further than or go in a different direction than the ones that I've talked about today. They are there. And I can tell you that if the House flipped tomorrow, background checks would pass. And without any question, the CDC stuff would pass without any question. The advanced notice to police officers would pass. A lot of the NICS fix stuff, like the FBI doesn't share information with local law enforcement on prohibited class individuals trying to buy guns. I'm sure that would change instantly. And there's a real strong possibility that other more stringent pieces of legislation would pass as well.
Thank you, Congressman. My name is Alan Zeta. I have a couple questions. Our son was in Isla Vista, actually, when the Isla Vista shooting happened, so it brought that home to us. One of the things you said was about there's 15 million long guns out there that, what do we do with them? We can't put the genie back in the bottle. Australia in 1998 had a shooting of children. They banned every single weapon, so they were able to do it.
No, they banned semi-automatic weapons.
Semi-automatic weapons. We are the greatest country in the world, and to be told that we can't do it here is ridiculous. We had slavery that we were told, oh, can't be done, we can't do it away. Civil rights, it's never going to pass. You know what? This is an uprising of people that I've seen that I've never seen in a long time. So I have a two-part question. My first question is, what is your stand on banning large magazines, capacity magazines? I haven't heard anybody ask that. And my other question is, my wife Sherry's the one that was organizing this, this march that's coming up. She sat for 3 days crying after the Florida shooting, and then she stood up and said, enough, I've had enough. This is a woman that never gets political, doesn't get involved in anything. How do we all get involved? What do you need us to do to make these laws happen? A lot of people just sit and go, oh God, it's horrible. What can we do? How do we help you? How do we help other congressmen and senators to pass these laws? What do we need to do?
Okay, thank you very much. Don't for a minute think that I'm suggesting that some of these ideas are never going to happen, nor should they be pursued. I'm trying to be very, very practical and get something passed that will save lives right now, immediately. And that's why we've prioritized these pieces of legislation to pursue them in that way. There's a political reality that no matter how much we want to see something else, somebody's got to be the political realist here. And that's what I'm trying to manage, to make sure we can thread this needle and save some lives as quickly as possible. In regard to the high-capacity magazines, they shouldn't be allowed. They absolutely shouldn't be allowed. And California has made it, you can't even own one in California, right? Yeah, you can't even own one in California. You better turn it in or get caught with it, and you get popped big time. And I think it's a 10-shot limit. Different states have different things. It needs to be done. It needs to be thought out and done well. And I say that because just a side story. When New York did their gun reform after Newtown, they passed really quickly. They passed a bill that did a number of things, one of which was they limited shell capacity to 7 rounds. And I'll never forget, I was in a meeting on gun violence prevention when that came out. And I looked at that, and my first, I understood everything that they did or why they did it, except the 7 rounds. And I'll never forget, I turned to my aide and I said, call Cuomo's office and find out why they did 7 rounds, because I had no idea why. They came back in about 5 minutes, and here's why they did 7 rounds. They said they were sitting around their conference table writing these laws, and they said, we've got to limit shell capacity. And somebody said, to how many? And everybody looked at you and said, I have no idea. And I'm giving you the shorthand version of this. And someone said, well, I have a friend that hunts. And they said, go call your friend and find out how many shells that what number we should set it at. The guy came back and he said, my friend says his rifle holds 5 shells. And they said, well, let's give him 2 extras. And that's a bit of a problem for trying to do gun violence prevention work, because right away all the critics say, well, there's a bunch of people who don't know what the heck they're doing writing these laws. And oftentimes you have people writing laws that don't know what the heck they're doing, and there's unintended consequences that don't work. But the law, the most common number is 10-shot magazines. So I don't think high-capacity magazines are a good thing in civilian hands any more than AR assault weapon platform rifles are. And what can you do? Excellent. You guys can get involved. The fact that you're here is important. The fact that you're going to go on this march on the 24th is important. You need to write letters. You need to make telephone calls. In our area, you're preaching to the choir. And I understand that sometimes if you don't have a choir, you don't have anybody to preach to. But nonetheless, you got to speak louder and wider. And every one of you has somebody in another state or in another California congressional district, an Army buddy, a college roommate, a cousin, a mother-in-law, a father, a brother, a sister, somebody. Call them. Tell them to get involved. Tell them how important this is. Tell them to let their member of Congress know this is important. We have 201 co-authors on my bill. Not one single California Republican is a co-author of that bill. And you all know people who live in Republican districts. Call them. Tell them to get involved. Tell them they demand that they're member of Congress. You've got cousins and high school cousins and other call them. Say, start a unit here in school and make your congressman do this stuff. I had a meeting yesterday. I was asked to come to a high school in Lake County in the district and talk about these things. And one of the kids said, we're going to have a walkout, coordinated with the national walkout. And we think it's really, really important. And just know that I advised them, I said, don't cut off your nose to spite your face. School's really, really important, and average daily attendance is really important. So do your walkout in conjunction with the school. Meet with the principal and the teachers and do it in a way that doesn't hurt your school, but gets your voice out there. And I was so impressed with this young man. He was a senior at Middletown High School, and he said, it's really important that we do this in Middletown. Because everybody says, yeah, all the liberals in the cities want to do this stuff, but the rural areas are different. He said, we're rural in Middletown, and we want people to know that we want sensible gun laws. So it was very, very heartening to hear that.
Hello, my name is Shannon Sweeney. I'm a student at Benicia High School, and currently there is no limit on the amount of ammunition you can buy at once in California. Do you think we should introduce legislation that would change it to add a limit or a waiting period for the amount of ammunition you can buy at once?
Well, my bottom line position is if you expand background checks and you make sure that the only people who can buy guns aren't criminals, aren't domestic abusers, and aren't dangerously mentally ill, the amount of bullets they have or the amount of guns they have is not an issue. And California has enacted some pretty stiff ammunition laws. They did it through an initiative, and in order to buy ammunition in California, as soon as they promulgate the regulations, you've got some major hoops to jump through. You've got to go through a background check. And you're going to be assessed a fee in order to do that. You get a car. You're going to get a card. Presumably, this is how it's going to work. They haven't figured out all the regulations yet. But presumably, you're going to sign up. You're going to get a background check, and you're going to get a card. And then every retail outlet that sells ammunition is going to have to be vetted. They're going to have to pay a fee, and they're going to have to get a card. You can't bring ammunition in from other states. You can't transfer ammunition, and the way the law is written and how they deal with it regulatorily, we'll find out probably next year, because it's proven to be a lot thornier than they thought it was going to be. But you can't give shells to someone. So if you're a kid and you want to go shooting, Uncle Bob can't say, "Great, I've got some shells, we'll go shoot." So it's a real tough set of laws that was passed. We don't know how it works yet, because it's such a major change in the law. They haven't figured out how to implement it.
Hi, my name is Jose Gomez, and I'm a student that goes to Vallejo High School.
I can't hear.
My name is Jose Gomez, and I go to this high school. According to a poll done by Quinnipiac University, 97% of Americans want universal background checks. Another poll done by CNN says 70% want stricter gun control. How are you going to put pressure on your colleagues on the right to pass these gun control reforms when it has overwhelming support across the country? Because we cannot wait until Congress turns blue in order to get common sense reforms passed.
Excellent. Just let me point out, he's the one that went partisan, not me. But the fact of the matter is, you're absolutely right. And Congress gets painted with a wide brush. This is not a congressional problem. This is a Republican problem. The Republican leadership in Congress has not allowed this issue to come for a hearing or from a vote. So make no mistake about that. And your numbers are spot on. 97% of the people in the United States of America want background checks expanded. 97%. More people in America want background checks than believe in capitalism, like vacations, pizza, and ice cream. And you can Google it and look it up. There's some 82 or 84% of NRA members want expanded background checks. It's absolutely nonsense that this has not been brought forward, and that's why it's so important to push this. The American people are with us on this.
Hi, I'm Morgan Bundy. I go to Benicia High School. And you've talked a lot today about background checks for felons and domestic abusers and such, but many people who commit these crimes, such as mass shootings, have no prior record and are not career criminals. So they have shown signs of violent behavior and or made threats online, like shooter Nicholas Cruz, who committed the shooting in Parkland, commenting on an online video, "I'm going to become a school shooter," and stated their plans to kill many people. So is there any way to implement, or are there any plans to implement a so-called at-risk program or provision that would allow local and federal law enforcement to intervene in situations, like I've stated before, and remove weapons from the hands of these people that are exhibiting these behaviors?
Yeah, excellent question. I talked a little bit about that, and the answer is yes. There's a standalone bill that would do it. I have a mental health bill that deals with kind of focused on gun safety issues. I have a provision in my bill, but it's the measure that I talked about that California did that will allow law enforcement to intervene and with a court order take guns away from somebody who may be a problem. And the other thing is, don't for a minute fall into the trap that, and I hear it all the time, people will tell me, say, well, your bill's no good because it wouldn't have stopped the last shooting, or your bill's no good because it wouldn't have stopped this shooting. You can't legislate based on the last tragedy. If you did, you would never, you'd either have so many laws you can't turn around or you'd never get anything done. And whenever somebody tells me that, that I'm out to lunch because my bill wouldn't have stopped so-and-so shooting, my response is the same. And it's, if the only bill you're going to support is a bill that would stop every shooting, the only bill you're going to support is the one that does away with all guns. And it's interesting because usually it's the people who are against any gun regulations that always throw that out there. And it's contradictory, because if that's what they want, then get rid of all the guns. I don't think we should get rid of all the guns, and I don't think they do either. And as I said earlier, it's time that they came to the picnic, figured out how to put on the books responsible laws that keep our communities safer.
Thank you for your time, Mr. Thompson. I'm not a student, but I do have a daughter that goes here. So I graduated a very large school district in California in the early 70s. We had a closed campus. Once school started, gates were locked. The only way in was the front gate, and we had a plainclothes officer on campus all day long. I've heard you mention about you're not for arming teachers. Why are you against them having that choice, though? If they go through the training to get a CCW, they have to qualify, their license renewable, why don't they have the choice to arm themselves to be that first responder? You hear teachers that go in front of their classroom to shield the bullets. You don't think if they had a permit, they would have shot back? Don't disarm the good people that want to help. Your first line of defense is the first responder. They're there before the officer, they're there before the military. And one more thing, federally, the AR that you see on the press, on the news, does not stand for assault rifle. It's Armalite rifle. It's the design of the bill, just like in 1911. Been around for a long time. Thank you.
Okay. I don't think anybody confused the AR with the term assault rifle. I didn't hear anybody say that. But you are correct. That's what it stands for. Again, I don't think that arming teachers is the way to go. But it is up to states and school districts to decide if they want to do that. And I don't necessarily subscribe to the theory that the only way to stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. I'm sure it happens. I'm sure there's a number of examples you can point to, but I can also point to examples where it didn't happen. And you saw that with the shooting in Nevada here a couple of years ago, where a couple came in and killed execution style 2 cops in a cafe. And then they ran across the street and they were held up in I think it was a Walmart store. And the cops came and they had the place surrounded, and there was a customer in that store who saw what was happening, and he had a carry permit. He took out his gun, and as he walked down the aisle, he told a woman there, said, just get back and stay under cover. I've got this handled. And he took one more step. She was one of the perpetrators, and she shot and killed him. So again, it takes a lot of training to know what to do and how to do it. I just don't think that a teacher off the street, congressman off the street, or a school superintendent off the street necessarily has that quality of training. And then arguably, the most proficient person with a firearm in the history of our country was this veteran, Chris Kyle. And everybody knows about Chris Kyle, the most lethal sniper in military history. And how did he die? He was a good guy, he had a gun, he had it with him, and somebody at a rifle range shot him and killed him. So it sounds good, but I just don't think bumper sticker solutions are the way to go. I think we really need to think this stuff out and come to the table with good public policy proposals. Understand?
And I was just asked to point out we're 25 minutes over, so.
Okay, we'll take one more question on each side.
Okay.
Thank you. And I appreciate all of your work especially on this bill and your activism about gun control. This is different. We're seeing a really different affected person out there, and it's these articulate young people that are in high school, and we've let them down. My generation, who protested the war, who protested for civil rights, we of this generation have let them down. And I feel so strongly about doing everything we can, and I know your bill will be a big, big impact. But I also believe that we need to hit these people in the pocketbook. Already, we have seen some of these gun dealing businesses raise their ages of who they sell to. We're also seeing like Delta Airlines that is protesting the NRA. We now have a voice with these young adults. And I am so proud of these students from Benicia, from Vallejo, because they are afraid to come to school. And that's wrong. So I appreciate everything you're doing, staying late here today, having this kind of town hall and this discussion, because enough is enough, and we are not going back.
You're absolutely right. And the owner of Dick's Sporting Goods store is a friend of mine, and I called her yesterday, and I thanked her for what Dick's Sporting Good did, and she said, I'm going to send you my brother's number. Please call him. He runs the business, and they talked this thing out, and he said they knew that it was going to hit them hard because there was going to be a backlash, and they said, you know, our stocks prices are going to go down. It's going to have an impact, but this is the right thing to do, and we're going to do it. So I agree with you. We ought to recognize that. We ought to be appreciative of that. And I told the group this morning over in Sonoma, I need a new pair of running shoes. I'm buying them from Dick's.
Hi, my name is Jorge. I'm a student here at Vallejo, and I'm also an activist for student rights. Thank you. So Kamala Harris recently said that action on gun violence is not a political question. She said that it's about keeping Americans safe. So my question to you is, what do you plan on doing to stop this from happening again? Because this is an epidemic that keeps on repeating itself. And just to let everybody here know, the United States is not number one in many things. We're not number one in education or healthcare. We're number one in mass shootings. That's what we're leading on.
Move the microphone away a little bit away from me. Could you say it again?
I was just saying that the United States is not number one on many things. The United States is not number one on education or healthcare. We're number one on mass shootings. That's what we're best at. So what do you plan to do to stop this epidemic from happening again and again? As a student, I feel like this is enough. School should be a place where I go to feel safe enough to get my education, and all of these things are stopping me from coming to school and paying attention to what my teacher has to say.
Thank you. That's a very good question. And I tried to explain what I'm doing to intervene in the gun violence issue. This is something that I've worked on every day for the last 5.5 years. And I'm insistent that I'm going to be able to accomplish some meaningful legislative reform to make our areas safer. In regard to the other issues that you talked about, I also believe in access to quality, affordable health care. I think we ought to be doing everything we can to make sure our schools are the best that they can possibly be. I think I already mentioned that I believe school teachers are way overworked and way underpaid, and we need to give them all the tools they need. So it's not. I'm not a one-trick pony. I'm trying to do as much as I can for everyone in our district and across the country. And gun violence prevention is one of the things in my portfolio. So thank you. Okay, last question right here.
My name's Joanne Villapando. Many people know me in the community. We've met. Me and Mel are very good friends. And I'm harmless to people.
You're what?
Harmless to people. But when I was 16 years old, I wanted to stand in the middle of the highway and shoot everybody as they drove up. I was a potential mass murderer. And if you took away my guns, it wouldn't matter. I knew how to make bombs. I knew how to make mustard gas. I knew all these kinds of things. I could have been very violent. And I ended up in the wrong side of town. I ended up with mental issues and stuff like that. But I always had a heart inside of me. and you ask, what can you do? You can help me. You can help the children out there that are hurting. All you need to do is let them know that they're loved and that they can be respected. But you hear many times that they're pushed aside, they're outcasted, they're not allowed to be in a community, in society. So they end up angry and they hurt. And then one day they go off. And yeah, the AR-15 or any weapon. I was in the Marines, 5 football fields. I could hit your eye. Every shot, every day. That was who I was. But luckily, God didn't let me do something to hurt people, and I never got arrested. So today I drive Uber. And what do I do in Uber? I have people in my back seat. And I have a personality, can open them up. And they spill their beans. And by the time they get out of that car, they feel pleased, they feel happy, they have a good day, they have another opportunity instead of doing something wrong. We can help people. And yeah, your bill that you're trying to do about expanded checks and stuff like that, guards, I mean, you got to do what you got to do because today it's out of control and you're not going to get a hold of it. But deep down inside, you need to help the people, the ones that are hurting. Now, I had gone to a local representative with an issue with the VA, and because I expressed my life, one of the workers in there went over the head of the representative in that office and called the VA police. They investigated me. Now I have a record, and now I have a black mark on my mental record. And I would never threatened anybody and never hurt anybody, but I was asking for help. And that's what I got. So that's what I have to say.
Thank you very, very much. Thank you all very much for coming. I really appreciate your being here, and I commit to you that I'll continue to work with all of you to ensure that we make some great progress in regard to gun violence prevention. So thank you all very much.